The morning sun cast long shadows across the training yard at Fort Campbell. Boots struck the concrete in uneven rhythms, sharp and careless, echoing across the open space. Sergeant Maya Rodriguez stood perfectly still at attention, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead as her platoon formed up around her. Somewhere behind her, metal clattered, a locker slammed, and a laugh burst out, too loud, too deliberate. It carried, bouncing off the barracks walls like a challenge she couldn't answer. She'd heard it before. The whispers in the chow hall. The sideways glances in formation. The comments that stopped just short of her hearing. 3 weeks into her posting at the 101st Airborne Division, and Maya had learned to keep her expression neutral, her posture perfect, her performance flawless. The laugh came again, followed by voices she recognized. Private First Class Jackson and Specialist Davis, to soldiers who would made it clear they didn't think she belonged here. Not in their unit. Not in their army. Did you see that? Jackson's voice carried intentionally. Fresh meat can't even gear up right. Maya's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She knew what this was about. During yesterday's equipment inspection, Colonel Patterson had walked the line with his characteristic stern expression, stopping at each soldier to examine their gear with meticulous attention. When he'd reached Maya, he'd frozen mid-step, his eyes locking onto something that made his face go pale. There, visible just above the collar of her uniform shirt, was a small tattoo. A delicate compass rose with coordinates beneath it. The exact coordinates of her hometown in Texas, where her father, a Vietnam veteran, had raised her on stories of honor and service. The regulations were clear. Visible tattoos were against Army standards, especially for officers and non-commissioned officers. Maya had gotten the tattoo years before enlisting, never imagining it would become a problem. She'd tried everything to keep it hidden, adjusting her collar, wearing higher-cut shirts, but yesterday's inspection had been conducted in full combat gear, and the tactical vest had pulled her collar down just enough. Colonel Patterson hadn't said a word. He'd simply stared at the tattoo for what felt like an eternity, his expression hardening with each passing second. Then he'd moved on without comment, leaving Maya standing there with heat creeping up her neck and the eyes of 30 soldiers burning into her back. Now, standing in formation 24 hours later, she could still feel the weight of that moment. The laughter behind her wasn't about her gear. It was about her perceived failure. Her vulnerability. The crack in her armor that Jackson and his friends had been waiting for. Platoon, attention. First Sergeant Williams' voice cut through the morning air like a blade. The laughter died instantly. Boots snapped together. Backs straightened. But Maya could feel the tension radiating from the soldiers behind her, the barely contained amusement at her expense. First Sergeant Williams walked the formation with deliberate steps, his eyes missing nothing. He stopped directly in front of Maya, and her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. The public reprimand. The example made. Sergeant Rodriguez, Williams said, his voice carrying across the entire formation. Colonel Patterson has requested your presence in his office immediately. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of whispered speculation through the ranks. Maya's stomach dropped. A summons to the colonel's office was never good news, especially not in front of the entire platoon. Especially not the morning after he'd discovered her violation. Yes, First Sergeant, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. She executed a perfect about-face and marched toward the battalion headquarters, feeling every eye on her back. Behind her, she heard Jackson's voice, barely a whisper but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Bet she gets Article 15. Maybe they'll finally send her packing. The walk to headquarters felt like miles instead of yards. Maya's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. An Article 15 meant non-judicial punishment. It meant a formal reprimand on her permanent record. It could mean reduction in rank, loss of pay, extra duty. It could derail everything she'd worked for, everything her father had dreamed of when he'd pinned her sergeant stripes on her uniform with tears in his eyes. She reached the headquarters building and climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step echoing in the empty hallway. Colonel Patterson's door stood slightly ajar. She could see him inside, sitting behind his desk, his uniform immaculate, his silver eagles catching the fluorescent light. Maya knocked 3 times, sharp and precise. "Enter," came the colonel's gruff response. She stepped inside, came to attention, and delivered a crisp salute. "Sergeant Rodriguez reporting as ordered, sir." Colonel Patterson returned her salute without looking up from the papers on his desk. For a long moment, he said nothing, just continued reading whatever document held his attention. Maya stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind his head, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Finally, the colonel looked up. His face was unreadable, weathered by decades of service into something hard and inscrutable. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Sergeant." Maya sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to fidget. She forced herself to remain still. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. "I believe so, sir." "My tattoo, sir. It was visible during yesterday's inspection." "And you are aware that visible tattoos violate Army Regulation 672-1? "Yes, sir." "Were you attempting to conceal it?" Maya hesitated. The truth could sound like an excuse. But lying to a superior officer was unthinkable. "Sir, I got the tattoo before I enlisted. I've done my best to keep it covered, but yesterday's gear configuration made that difficult." Colonel Patterson nodded slowly. Then, to Maya's complete shock, he stood up and turned around, lifting the back of his uniform shirt. There, covering most of his lower back, was an elaborate tattoo of an eagle with spread wings, clutching arrows and an olive branch. It was beautiful and completely against regulations. He lowered his shirt and turned back to face her, and for the first time, Maya saw something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Vietnam, 1971, he said. "Got it in Saigon on a 3-day pass. Stupid decision by a young private who thought he was invincible. Spent the next 35 years making sure nobody ever saw it." Maya stared at him, completely at a loss for words. The colonel sat back down. "Your tattoo, Sergeant Rodriguez. Those coordinates. Where are they?" "Amarillo, Texas, sir. My hometown. My father's hometown." "Your father served?" "Yes, sir. Army, Vietnam, 1st Infantry Division." Something shifted in the colonel's expression. He pulled open a drawer in his desk and withdrew a folder, flipping it open to reveal Maya's service record. "I've been reviewing your file, Sergeant. Top marks at the NCO Academy. Expert marksmanship. Commendations from your previous unit commander. You are one of the best NCOs I have." Maya felt her throat tighten. This wasn't what she'd expected. Not at all. You are also one of 3 female NCOs in this battalion, the colonel continued. Which means you are under a microscope every single day. Some soldiers in this unit are waiting for you to fail. They want to prove you don't belong here. I'm aware of that, sir. Good. Because here's what's going to happen. You are going to go back to your platoon. You are going to continue being the outstanding NCO that your record shows you are. And you are going to make damn sure that tattoo stays covered. Wear an undershirt if you have to. Medical tape. Whatever it takes. Understood? Yes, sir. And Sergeant? Those coordinates on your neck. They represent something. Honor. Legacy. Service. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of where you came from or why you are here. Maya felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built up over weeks of isolation and doubt. Thank you, sir. Colonel Patterson stood, and Maya jumped to her feet. Dismissed, Sergeant. And Rodriguez. Show those idiots what a real soldier looks like. Maya saluted, executed an about-face, and walked out of that office with her head higher than it had been in weeks. When she returned to the training yard, Jackson and Davis were watching, expecting to see defeat in her eyes. Instead, they saw fire.